Think you're ready for this? Nice. We'll just give it a minute to see who comes. Yesterday, okay. A couple minutes. Otherwise, we'll just get started talking about the subject matter anyway, and everyone can come along. You know, the first thing I'll just do is what I do at the beginning of every video anyway. So, for the to start, while we're waiting to see who may arrive for this live, I just want to talk about creating sacred space. Jamie and I did create sacred space together here before we started this. We'd like to offer you to accept the energy of unconditional love into your space, which we have blessed this space with here today, along with some guides. We'd also like to offer you to bring in sacred space in whatever way resonates with you or with whatever higher guide, higher self, God, anything that resonates with you personally. And know that ultimately, when it comes to creating space or sacred space, your temple is the only thing you need, and your temple is your physical body. It is your avatar, your anywhere that you have your light and your consciousness is where you have your sacred space.
And the good thing is, it goes wherever you go. So you can create sacred space anywhere.
Exactly. Now, we do like to bring some things with us sometimes, crystals, candles, things like that, that we feel like add to the essence, but that is more for purposes of just creating gravity. It's not for purposes of, it's not required for creating sacred space. Just right. Your heart.
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, sacred space. Second, we do realize that we've kind of recently surprised a lot of our followers with the news that we've decided to dissolve our marriage contract. And we know that that is not to be expected for most people, but for us, this is not, it's not as though this blindsided us. Right. We were there for the journey, and we happen to know exactly the ways that we've helped each other, with the ways that we've triggered each other. This video, I've asked Jamie actually to join me for this one. I feel like he would be very helpful for this, and he agreed to. Also, I know he was talking to a couple of people in the soul family earlier today. We want to talk about this in terms of, we will definitely talk about twin flames, and how that's affected, but we're also going to talk about karmic partners and soulmates, and how just in general, how the triggering and purging process works and initiation, because ultimately, whether you've got a twin flame or no twin flame, whether twin flames are something that resonate with you or not, we are getting triggered and doing purging processes throughout our lives, but also certainly throughout the spiritual awakening, and how we energetically affect each other is part of the process as well, ultimately. So first things first, I'd actually like you to go ahead and just give a little bit of an explanation. I guess we'll go in that order, but just kind of talk about what our experience is like, or how.
Right. Well,
however you feel.
Right. You know, what's interesting is during this process, there have been many, many, many times, especially when we're going through a purging process, understanding what purging really means and what triggers means, and why this and why that. What you'll recall what I'm about to say very clearly, because it's hard sometimes, especially when you're doing it by yourself. And we did it by ourselves. We chose to be each other's guru. I thought we were the blind leading the blind, and in reality, when we made that choice, I thought it was kind of like a pact, but I really didn't know what kind of adventure I had just signed up for.
Certainly, he is forgetting the fact that before he and I met, I've had many guides myself, as well as a lot of study. Right. So while we chose on our path over the last couple of years, partly due to circumstances and partly just out of choosing to try to go within for this, we chose to be each other's gurus for this last couple of years. Right. But he certainly met me very, very far into
right.
into a lifetime of study at this
I would consider myself a perpetual student. I've really never stopped wanting to learn and grow. And but there were times in this with you where I was like, gosh, why does everything have to be a lesson? Sometimes I just wanted to chill and relax. I wanted to look at things as like inconsequential or little things that. Um, but yeah, so one of the things, first of all, that I had to kind of recognize is everything is a lesson.
Right.
And it's a lesson to learn how to grow, or it's a lesson to repeat itself so that you can learn how to grow.
Or it's a lesson to learn how to allow, because sometimes the lesson that we're learning in life is how to receive. Sometimes the lesson we're learning is how to allow others to give to us, or how to relax.
Right.
Sometimes
how to accept.
It's not that everything is a lesson that you're constantly active and you're constantly learning. Sometimes the best way to learn lesson is to sit back and relax and let that lesson assimilate for a while.
Right.
So it's it's a
and that concept of learning is different too. See, because I'm used to pack your bags in the book and go sit in the class and have somebody take notes and memorize stuff.
Right.
That's learning a lesson. That's what I thought learning a lesson. But going within, I probably told me that 1,000 times, and maybe on the 998th time, I started to realize what going in really means. And going in means to kind of quiet your mind, learn how to quiet. It's
well,
not
going within,
it's
not just that. It's recognizing that we have two minds. So it's going within the right mind, within the mind that we haven't been really well trained, or most of us, to go within. So I'm going to spend a second talking about that.
Okay, that's good.
We have a mind that's within our brains, and we have a mind that's within our hearts, and those are two actual minds that are capable of thinking. And we get really effectively taught, especially most of us at a very young age, not to listen to this mind, to analyze things, analyze them as much as we possibly can. Now, if you're anything like me, I know Jamie is this way too, you can very, very effectively argue an argument in your brain, and you can argue both sides of that argument and have both sides of that argument win. That's just the magnificence of the human logic and human analyzing mind, is that we can just analyze things to death. The heart can't do that. Your heart can only sing, it only resonates with things that are true for you, things that are more like a resonant vibratory memory. It's more like you're receiving something that you already know. So your heart just sings when you hear that. And it can't do that with false information. No matter how hard you try, you can't force yourself to have a testimony or to believe something where the parts that aren't true. You can only believe the parts that make your heart sing, and you can't believe the parts that don't. Now, we have a nerve that goes from our hearts up to our brains. This is called your vagus nerve. And your vagus nerve is the biggest nerve in your body, and it feeds oxygen from your heart to your brain. So what happens when you get overly triggered, overly stimulated, my grandpa used to say, my mom used to say, above a 6 on a scale from 1 to 10, that nerve gets cut off. Your vagus nerve that goes from your heart's mind to your head's mind, that gets cut off. So literally, your heart can't communicate with your brain during those situations. It's very important to learn emotional mastery, so that you can make sure that even in while the goal to self-mastery is something that we're all trying to achieve over time, and it's particularly more difficult with maybe some people than others, the goal ultimately is to be able to be in those situations and to be able to think with a level of clarity that puts us in our heart's mind instead of our head's mind, so that we're not being reactive in those moments, and we're instead being really responsive. And responsive is discernment instead of judgment. Right. So the goal is not to ignore those triggers or pretend they're not there, or even just to rise above them. It's to learn to recognize them so that you can master what those triggers are as they come to the surface. So
right. Well, and that in and of itself is part of the lesson. Is one of the objectives is to come here to learn how to master emotion. Right. And we are emotional beings, and so we live by emotion. We make decisions by emotion. And sometimes those decisions are conscious, sometimes they're unconscious, but they are a choice.
Right.
And they're, if we don't know how to control what's giving us directions,
Right.
we're running into problems.
Now, everything. We are supercomputers. We really, truly are. This is a vehicle of light that is really magnificent. Our bodies are in a world that is basically an illusion. The third dimension is essentially an illusion. We happen to have vehicles that are going to be graduating with us into higher levels of dimension, because the physical human body is made of a kind of plasma from the center of the universe called pleroma. Well, not made from it. It's an integration, a synthesis of pleroma and other things. But that is actually going to be able to advance through a physical ascension. That's a pretty incredible thing. It's happening over a period of waves, and in that process, our vehicle is releasing whatever triggers have been accumulated over time. And this magnificent computer that we keep talking about is being coded 100% of the time. It does not matter if you're awake. It does not matter if you're asleep. As a matter of fact, when you're asleep, you're almost even more susceptible to it, because you're not putting out blinders.
Right.
So, which is why, frankly, it's probably not the best thing to fall asleep watching TV unless you're really, really conscious about what you're going through.
That's why everything's a lesson.
Everything.
Even how you fall asleep.
Right.
What you dream about.
Because you can't stop the lessons from coming. So you want to be really conscious about how you're choosing to code your avatar, how you're choosing to code your computer. And the problem is that throughout our lives, most of us have been coded really effectively to not listen to this mind, to only listen to this mind, which is an out of balance way to live our lives. And so we hold energy within our body, and that energy gets denser and denser and denser, and those energies are known as triggers. And well, it's one of the things that they're known as. But as we go through a process of ascension, either way, especially when there's a physical ascension that's happening to the planet, people are going to be experiencing this light and having these triggers come up right now, no matter what. But if you're conscious about the process, not only does it speed up the process, in some ways it may seem like a little more intense, but it does speed up a process that's happening anyway. And over time, you have an opportunity to recognize that that's actually what's happening, that you're being triggered. You're being given an opportunity to release something. I think one of the big things that I came to realize as we were on this process, kind of stumbling through together sometimes, was that oftentimes when we were feeling triggered by one or the other, it was not actually a trigger that the other person had really triggered. We were feeling something that had to do with like past experiences, years past, or possibly even past lives or past life experiences, deep fears, deep rooted fears. And sometimes we would reflect and realize afterwards, it was almost like we had planned those interactions that would not have felt planned at the time, but we had planned them for the purposes of learning things about ourselves. And so I think that's a good point to talk about twin flames or karmic partners or soulmates or things like that, because, you know, we were introduced to the concept of twin flames pretty early on in our relationship, and it felt like, oh my God, this is answering every question we've ever had about ourselves. Oh my gosh, it explains all of these weird, bizarre, energetic connections. But at the same time, it made it so we became really hyper focused on the twin flame thing, and we became hyper focused on each other. And so oftentimes, I think that our triggering process was even accentuated with each other because of the fact that we were more focused on creating a union together than we were about creating a union within.
Right.
So,
well, for me, there was a lot of conflicting messages. You know, one of those messages when we read the Law of One is that we're all united, that we're all one, that,
right.
You know, and then, so that in and of itself, I wrapped my head around that very easily. But then you learn twin flames or soulmates, and it's like, well, we're all one, but we're a little bit more one because we're twin flames. And that, for me, that got me in a train of thought of then trying to isolate myself or separate myself again from the one, the law of one. I was violating that. And even the idea of soulmates became difficult after a while. And there are a lot of, for me, there's a lot of mixed messages for twin flames and soulmates. But in reality, as great as those definitions may be, it still boils down to you yourself, you the individual, have to learn how to love yourself, number one. So the most important relationship, the most important twin is you,
Right.
not another physical being. And to me,
Right.
but being
Agreed.
able to explore friendships and being able to explore spiritual growth, whether that's
Tribe.
our tribe or some
Mhm.
things, you have to take that hero's journey.
It's the ebb and flow. It's
Flow,
a solitude
yeah.
journey where you're learning how to be a community.
And it is on the path to, the reason that we're purging is to ascend,
To raise your vibration.
to raise the vibration. And you can't be in the highest possible vibration when you are thinking limitation. And that limitation for a lot of people is, in order for me to be complete, I need somebody.
Or I need something.
Or something.
Or I need something outside of me, or someone else is going to, thank God, someone else is
Yeah.
going to save me. Someone else is going to save me.
Right. Now, that doesn't discount the fact that we can have wonderful friendships and beautiful,
Absolutely.
unconditionally loving arrangements.
Well, that was one of the things I wanted to just say, because I know that there is a lot of conflicting information out there about the twin flame experience, but there's also something in our world called perspective, which means literally 8 billion people have 8 billion different perspectives. There's no two exact same truths for two people on this planet. So a couple things about that is, one, everything is divine. Everything is divine. So I can see now why we were introduced to the information about twin flames the way we were, why we believed it the way that we did, and then why we also had the progression of seeing kind of like the waves of understanding of the twin flame process, because it was important for us maybe to think that way right at first, because that guided the way that we continued to study from there. And then it was important that we kind of got frustrated with it at certain points, because that guided how we started to look for other information. And then it was important that we found, and then ultimately it was important that we found what resonated as ultimate truth for ourselves about this process. And I can see the importance of every single step along the way. So I don't get frustrated per se by the fact that there's a lot of conflicting information out there. I just understand that it's teaching me a really valuable lesson about discernment. I mean, that's really how I feel about any information I get out there on the internet. And I would hope that anyone that's watching this would see what parts resonate with them and what parts don't resonate with them. If it's really just absolutely not resonating with you at all, I don't know why you're watching anymore. Feel free to stop. But if it is resonating with you, that doesn't mean every single word of it is going to resonate with you. It has to resonate with you, or else we're wrong and you're right, or what. It's just not how it works. There's waves of things, and what's entirely true for me is probably going to be almost entirely true for him, because we're quite similar and we share very similar frequencies. But that doesn't mean that my ultimate truth
is my ultimate truth. And it's not. Couldn't be, could it?
Wouldn't be the point.
Yeah. So, yeah, because I didn't sign up for this to become a clone.
Right. Oh, yeah. And the second thing I was going to say about this process is in relation to like karmic partners or twin flames or soulmates, is that everyone in the process is also activating you. So everyone that comes into your life, especially like a strong energetic bond, whether that's a profoundly negative energetic experience or a profoundly positive negative experience, these are all in some ways triggers for you for your growth process. And so I would say, rather than just, for me personally, rather than I do like the idea of looking at myself as my twin first. If I have another twin, that's super fantastically awesome, and we'll figure that out as we go. But in the meantime, I'm my own twin. This is my best friend. We recognize and honor each other as completely sovereign and separate beings who make basically like a 1 + 1 = 3 combination. Doesn't mean I'm not entirely whole. I'm totally whole. I'm freaking proud of everything I've gone through in my life, the good, the bad, all of it. I'm proud of the shitty things I've done, because I'm really proud of the fact that I've turned around and realized I don't ever want to do things like that again, because it doesn't make me feel good. So I'm proud of all of those things. I'm proud of the things that he's done. I know that he's an entirely whole separate being from me. But I also know that when we come together, we don't just equal 1 + 1 = 2. We equal 1 + 1 = 3. And that is a really beautiful energetic bond to have found together. And it would be silly of us and ridiculous of us, I think, at this point, not to honor the journey. Best battle buddy I ever could have asked for.
And vice versa.
But part of the process was purging, and the purging process. The purging process was tough, and I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the ego, because I know that the ego is something that is fear-based. The ego is fear-based, and it is fear. It is the vibration of fear. Essentially, it's the entire hive mind of fear. And just because someone is a masculine and someone is a feminine doesn't mean that one person has all of the masculine traits and one person has all of the feminine traits. That's not the way that it works. And we both experience triggering and release of things that are on both sides. I think we both had to experience moments of like recognizing how badass we are when we didn't realize it. And I think we also had to have moments of like real humility and recognizing that maybe we didn't know as much as we thought we knew in certain situations, or maybe even we knew a whole lot more than we thought we knew in certain situations, and we surprised ourselves. I think that the equation would probably have been more graceful without having the best battle buddy I could ever ask for, but it wouldn't have been as
well, definitely not as learning.
Yeah, I mean, we often said it's like we've lived 2, 3, 4, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. We kept saying more and more dramatically more as we'd only been together for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 months. We were together almost constantly and studying and going through these experiences of trigger and release and all of these things. But really, all of those things end up leading to a series of initiations. And what happens during the initiation phase is that you're essentially tested for the things that you've been releasing, that you've been coming up to learn. And during initiation, that's for me been the hardest. It's been not just, learning that I'm a goddess, not just telling myself all the time I'm a goddess because it's gonna make me feel good, but coming to actually not only recognize and learn and remember who I am and the essence of my being, but then to turn around and, you know, early on when we were together, I would write little like blog stories and just little things to try to get people to learn a little bit. But I was like terrified even putting those out. I didn't want to even, at first, I didn't even want to put my name on them. And I did put them on, but we would release everything together and I was just really scared and he was really encouraging me along the way. But I remember having a lot of fears about just
success.
Well, and also like that
Taking
level of
part,
attention
yeah.
and stuff.
Yeah.
I used to talk about if I was ever going to be known for anything, I'd want to be known for like J.K. Rowling or something where it's ridiculously famous. I loved writing. I love writing. Like writing is like my favorite thing. But the idea of being recognized and stuff, I would tell him that was
right. Well, and that's a good example because you were very. The description I gave to you early on in our relationship was, you remind me of a scared rabbit, and obviously, if I was picking up on that emotion, there's a reason and a cause of why you were feeling that way.
A lifetime of experiences that hadn't been released or purged from my body. So I was in a constant state of fear and terror.
Well, and the first thing about that is recognizing that is not you. That's just an emotion or frequency that you're tapping into.
Right.
So once we recognize that on this path that we become aware of certain things, we now are aware that this vibration within me doesn't feel good. So I got to get rid of it. And that's called purging.
Right.
So if I don't purge and get rid of it, little idiosyncrasies are going to trigger that old emotion that happened way back
Right.
when, and they just get bigger and bigger and bigger and accumulate as we get older until finally to the point where
Well, right, and all energy has a frequency. All energy has a frequency. Okay, so say I struggled with suicidal depression my whole life. So I had these deep rooted energies that have been trapped in my body that were getting stronger and stronger and stronger, like gravity. And these frequencies, whenever I would tap in and I'd start feeling suicidal, because it's a frequency, I started tapping into everybody within a few block radius. Or miles. I don't know exactly how far, but I know that part of the reason why it was viscerally painful to feel that depressed, part of the reason why I was so depressed, it felt like I just wanted to die, was because I was not only feeling my own pain, I was feeling the pain and suffering of everyone in a community. And unfortunately, most people who are this highly sensitive to things are doing the same thing. And so they're on the edge of ready to just check out. They don't even realize that they're not just feeling their own feelings or their own thoughts. It feels so real.
Right. Can I give an example of that? So, we've learned that thoughts or frequencies also come in, and you're talking about kind of a hive consciousnness,
right.
meaning more than one, more
right.
than you. So, if I'm walking down the street and all of a sudden I see I might be minding my business, having a great day, and tons of people just rush by me. And I start to look around and I start to notice that there's this movement of people. People are rushing to an area, like not to get away from something behind them, but they want to look at something. And I would get caught up in that. Oh, what's everybody doing? And so all of a sudden I'm part of that consciousness. And we run to whatever the scene is. And it may be something big or maybe something happened. But I started to feel like I'm drawn. I got to go see this.
Right, and you are. That's the thing, is that it's a magnetic effect. It's a magnetic effect.
And a lot of this energy, we don't know that it may be the influences of other people's thoughts that are vibrating towards us. And we're like, yeah, if it's depression, then our depression gets worse, or it triggers depression. But we ourselves aren't necessarily depressed. It's just maybe somebody next door, maybe somebody in our family, or just our dog is sick and we just feel there.
Or, I mean, we are depressed, but it's, you know how I was talking about a 1 + 1 = 3 with us energetically? Well, if you're depressed and your neighbor's depressed, but you only think you're depressed, it certainly feels like you're a whole heck of a lot more depressed than you actually are. So it's not to say that you're not depressed, but it feels a lot more dramatic. So if you happen to be in a neighborhood that struggles with a lot of depression, or a city or a town, a community that struggles with a lot of suicidal struggles or depressive struggles, or a particular set of struggles, it's not a coincidence that those things happen in kind of large bunches, because there's a frequency that people are tapping into, and often they don't even recognize that the reason that frequency feels as strong as it does is because their neighbors and their friends and things are having similar frequencies, and we are constantly sharing and alchemizing energy with other beings as we interact with them, even if we're sitting inside of our house. Your energy doesn't care about your walls.
Or the car you drive, or the money.
No, I'm just saying it doesn't care about your walls, in that it will go through the walls. It's like a chain link fence. It goes. The energy is not affected. So he could be in the next room, and I could be in here, or you could be. Artemis is here, or you could be fighting with your children, or not fighting with your children. You could be fighting in the next room away from your children and feeling like you're really effectively guarding them from it. But ultimately what's happening is that they're feeling it. So they might not realize what's going on, and that's better than them being consciously aware of what the adult things that may be happening. But at the same time, if you wonder why children may seem a little bit more sensitive when those things are going on, even if they don't consciously know what's happening, it's because their supercomputer is being energetically and sensitively affected by the energies in the room. It's important to do your.
And energy doesn't go away. In fact, it can last thousands of years. I remember going to Europe and visiting some of these old cathedrals that have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. And when you walk into these things, the architecture is not it's not modern for sure. It's very old, sometimes decrepit, and sometimes it's definitely falling apart. But there's a feeling and energy when you walk in that even if you're not religious, you all of a sudden become a little bit more humble and a little bit more reverent.
The
And
essence.
that is the essence that's within that. So that building has an energy.
Mm-hmm.
So when people walk into that energy, they're going to feel it. And it's the same concept of when I'm triggered over something, it may be that frequency around me, which is why we have to learn. I love your video on grounding. I have to eliminate everybody's outside influences because hell is going to freeze over quicker than some people learning how to control their own space.
Right.
And so what we have to do is we have to eliminate all that other frequency so I can just focus on me.
Oh, you're talking about how to become a Jedi.
Yeah.
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 So that is one of the individual goals, even no matter what bond you may or may not have. You can't hear us?
Is that a little bit better, Artemis?
Okay.
All right. Perfect.
So as far as becoming a Jedi goes, that is whether you're a twin flame, whether you're not a twin flame, whether you're whatever, you're a sovereign being. You are an individual soul being, and learning how to guard your force field is a really important part of energetic mastery. Because when you learn how to guard your force field effectively, you can give energy with a lot of heart and soul and like really deeply give and share with others, while also being fed energy back because you understand how to alchemize energy very, very quickly. You're not allowing your energy field to just be drained. And you also recognize when you are too drained to be doing those things for others, because it's not even really a service for them if you're just draining yourself. You need to take the time to heal yourself. And so becoming a Jedi is about learning how to master your own energy field. And in order to like really be able to unify energetically with anyone else ever, you would have to first know how to do that, so that you're not just having an uneven relationship ever. You could constantly be giving and taking at the same time.
Right. And learning balance within yourself so that the whole reason behind this is because reminds me of when I'm on an airplane.
Make sure you're talking loud enough.
It reminds me when I'm on an airplane, or when you're on an airplane, the flight attendants tell you to make sure that your mask is on first before you help your kids or somebody else.
Right.
The concept of being able to help somebody is where a lot of light workers or spiritual people get to. They want to help everybody else. But you still have to remember that you have to put on your own mask first, or you become part of the casualty group. And so it's another way of saying you have to be able to become a Jedi, master your emotions, so that you can help other people do whatever they need to do, master their emotions. Learn.
Well, two legit Jedis are going to be a whole lot more effective than two people who are trying to help the other person become a Jedi so much that they're not worried about their own Jedi-ness. Right. That's going to be a much more effective way of helping humanity. And so it's really important. Right. Now, I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about initiation, because after you go through this process of triggering and purging, and Artemis, just so you know, we may go back and watch, and if it's too quiet, we'll just end up re-recording this. But I think if you can hear it, I think you're gonna like what we've already said about the triggering and purging. But as far as those triggers and the purging, when you're energetically around anyone, well, really anyone, but certainly around someone who you have a soul connection with, whether it's twin flame, soulmate, whether this person is like your arch enemy or your best friend, either way, you have a strong energetic connection with many people throughout your life, and any of these people are going to have some ways of triggering your inner trapped energies.
Yeah.
Okay, so those inner trapped energies will get jostled loose, and you may not even realize how or why you're affecting each other in this way. But if you allow yourself to go through the process in a way that can be healing, and certainly with some level of consciousness of what's happening, then ultimately at some point after like the deepest parts of the purging happen, there's also a form of initiation that happens. These are some people call this up phasing, some people call it I mean, it's just raising your vibration, but essentially we're always raising our vibration when we're going towards the light or going towards love. But there's sometimes where you take kind of a quantum leap forward, and those quantum leaps are like initiations. And typically when those initiations occur, it's because you've just overcome something real tough. It means that you have faced a fear, you have overcome something. Artemis, I know that with all of your climbing and everything that you're accomplishing physically right now, after you've been told that that's not something you would be able to do, some major spiritual initiation for you, because you're accomplishing like you're overcoming obstacles. It's the Ganesha energy that's within you, the overcoming of obstacles. But then it's an initiation into a next phase. Okay, and the initiations often look so freaking crappy, and you don't recognize that that's what they are as they're happening. Right. But then when you come through the next phase and there's just a major weight lifted, like you literally feel lighter, like you've lost 10 pounds. Yeah. Well, when that happens, you have just lost a major amount of trapped energy. Right. It's like a congratulatory, you did it. You passed this initiation. Right. And they're not, I have yet to have what I felt like was an initiation. Right. That I didn't just really not like.
And you know when you pass these, you know when you've gone through that, because not only do you feel lighter, but both of us have had feelings where, I don't know, there was a straw or something in our body where we just felt it being sucked out, sometimes like a viscous removal of some energy. You just don't know what's going on. Sometimes it's instant. Right. You know.
Right. Oh, for me, one of the times I can think of a sense of physical release where it actually felt like I was releasing from, I would say, basically the back of my fifth chakra. Right. It was at a point where I was realizing that, I always wanted to believe that I was just like so happy and rainbows and butterflies and in spite of the fact that I knew I struggled with deep depression and a lot of fear and sadness over things that have happened in my life, and I hadn't really processed appropriately. And so I know that there was a point where I had to accept that I had feelings that I really didn't want to associate myself as having, like feelings of anger from like really, really long time ago. And in finally accepting that I had those feelings within, which was horrible. Like I was resisting. And then I finally released and I accepted that I was really angry about some things that happened when I was a kid. Like angry, real angry. Right. And in feeling that release, waking up in the morning.
How does the triggering start is the question?
Oh, yeah, I can get to that in just a second. Okay. Because I want to finish what I was saying. I remember I was in a shower. I was actually I was in a shower and I was sitting on the floor in the shower crying, and I felt what felt like plasma or liquid or like almost like a warm honey that was dripping out of the backside of my fifth chakra, that felt like I was releasing. I could feel, I could sense, held in anger, releasing, because I was finally admitting to myself that I was angry about some things I didn't want to admit that I was angry about. And so in this release, it was very visceral, and I left that experience not only feeling less physical pain within my body, but also feeling like like I'd lost like 15 pounds. I mean, it
Right.
was, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely profound. That's why I'm saying you really know when that release happens.
Right.
Because it's just physically and spiritually and etherically, you just like something I'm feeling. You just
Right.
know.
Now, as far as how it starts, it's a little different for everyone, and your process. I mean, so for me, I never had like just like an awakening moment. I was always kind of really drawn to these things. I was always secretly hiding these things from my family and friends, and really, 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 really afraid to open up this part of my heart to the world, because I felt like that was just filleting my heart out on a table that was always kind of proving to me that that hurts. So I was hiding these parts of myself most of my life. But I did have, for me, what triggered it on a more open level was the last time I got really deeply suicidally depressed, and that was a so most people that I've heard say that it's something really dramatic that happens, a near-death experience, a death of a friend or a family member, a really serious illness or car accident, a physical experience of some sort that just forces people to kind of go within. And for me, I would call being as suicidal as I was a pretty fucking near-death experience. Right. I mean, one of the counselors said this is the worst case I've ever seen. I'm 100% positive that she will not survive the day if we don't put her in the hospital. I was on 24-hour monitoring for like 4 or 5 days while I was in there, because they were that sure that I was going to try something while I was there. So I was very, very close to death, and really, really angry right now.
Yeah, I'll answer that in a second.
Yes, he'll be the perfect one to answer that. Yeah. So anyway, for Jamie, I know that he was always on a journey for the intellect, a journey for the mind, a journey for the academic growth, and has been a student his entire life, working on 2 PhDs when I met him. So trust me, it's not as though he just started studying when we met. It was nothing like that, but things took a much more spiritual direction for him around then. And it also happened that he was in the middle of what was not a pretty divorce. It was with grown kids, and it was a long marriage, and it was a beautiful marriage for the lessons that it taught both of them. But the divorce itself was super painful, and so that might not be a near-death experience, but it's certainly enough to rattle humans. I can't imagine anyone that wouldn't call it, well, I guess our divorce is a little different, but
very different.
Most divorces a lot different, but most divorces are traumatic. They're one of the most traumatic experiences you can have. I know my first one was.
Yeah.
So I know that he was in a traumatic experience at the time that we came along, even if it was not, a physical tragedy or so typically I would say what really spurs, whether like for example with me, I'd always been kind of on a spiritual journey. But this is where I kind of got a case of the fuck it's, and I didn't really care as much if people were going to think I was crazy, because they already did. I was getting out of the hospital. So as far as I was concerned, I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to make spirituality. Well, it wasn't even spirituality. My goal was, as I left the hospital, if I was going to leave that hospital, I was bound and determined to learn how to love myself so that I could help other people learn how to love themselves. And in that process, I realized that I was going to have to be a little bit more open with the world about the things that I have learned inside, and how I came through that process. But prior to that, I was so guarded about sharing stuff that it's not that I wasn't spiritually awake, but I was too scared to spiritually skyrocket or spiritually use that as a springboard. And that became my springboard into spiritual awakening. His divorce / his Anna was his springboard into spiritual awakening, because When you're first in a relationship with people, one of the first things that you do is start sharing a lot of things about yourself. And I happened to be at a point in time where I was sharing things about myself I'd never shared with people before. And so I was learning a ton from him, academically, and about his courage and his confidence in certain aspects of his assertiveness that he's developed over his life. And in the meantime, I was kind of initially more subtly, and then over time a lot more dramatically, introducing concepts I've been studying my whole life. So it kind of became this little flip in the balance that was happening over time until, is that a fair way to?
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
A fair way to put it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and
So he anchored me. Look, he's got anchors all over his shirt. So he was my anchor to help bring me more into these lower chakra strengths.
Yeah, and Anna was the etherical fairy that was everywhere. That was just fun and pixie and
like a butterfly. I've got my butterflies all over my room.
Right. Well, and Artemis, I'm going to give you a masculine approach, if you will. Hopefully, it's divine masculine approach. But I grew up in a very patriarchal household. I have 6 older brothers, a father that was very manly. He was a high school football coach. And when I was little, the expectations are, as a man or as a boy, you got to be a man, you got to be tough, and you got to be strong because you're the protector, and go try out for the football team, and you got to do well, and you got to be all this. And when that doesn't happen, you feel one of the big emotions is fear. So as a little kid, I felt fear, and I know what that frequency is. And every time that I did something where I had to face a challenge I didn't know how to do, I would get scared, and that scared factor would bring me back to fear. So now fast forward to age 47, you got a lifetime of all these.
Well, wait, I mean, there's more to it, because most people, when they get out of their childhood homes and they're out on their own, there's a little bit more autonomy, but he got out on his own and he was in the military. So that went from one level of regimented thinking to a whole new level of regimented thinking before he then kind of got out on his own. So there, by the time he's 47 years old, the structured thinking was really well rooted.
Well, and the feeling of fear, I had experienced that literally hundreds, if not thousands of times during my life. So I'm familiar with fears. I know what fear is.
Even if it looked different than the kind of fear that I felt that made me look frantic. His fear didn't make him look frantic. He held it in a place that made him look it was
different.
Yeah. He looked very confident, but it was
right. So as a guy, if I know that fear, and so for example, if somebody like wakes up in the morning and they hate their job, okay, and they go to their job, and if you don't know what you're doing, you just hate your job. People, I say, they live quiet lives of desperation because they just don't know what to do, and life sucks, and they just do it anyways. They march forward.
Right.
But when you get to a spiritual path, you have the choice of evolving, and you realize that that is a frequency you can get rid of. So when I wake up in the morning and I'm working for Joe Schmo down the street, and I hate that job, and just I get anxious, which is a representation in my body. It's a feeling. Fear is in my body. And now I know about purging. So now what I have to do is I have to say, okay, now that I'm triggered because I'm thinking of my boss, or maybe I'm thinking I'm going to lose my job, or I didn't pay the bill on time, whatever thing causes fear. If I recognize that, I can now go back to when I was first little, learning about fear, when it was coded to me by my father or my family or something like that,
or neighbors or teachers. My goodness, that's a big one.
Yeah, all those reinforcements in the middle have coded me to understand fear. So now what
they code for both things. It's not like anyone's purposely coding you for fear, but they're fear coded too. They're coding you based on their coding, which is based on their coding.
Well, and so now we want to get rid of it, right? So we got to purge. So now what I start to do is I start to figure out the going within process, where I can go back to those moments and reconfigure that through a process of alchemy, where now my emotion that I attached back then, I released it, and it doesn't matter. So now when I wake up in the mornings, like gosh, instead of working for this job down the street, maybe I have the ability to go get a better job. And that is two very different pathways of thinking, but one of them allowed you to release the veil or become unveiled or become knowledgeable or to ascend to or a larger awareness.
Right. And I'm going to talk real quick about what happens when you can purge quickly. Because once you've kind of gotten yourself through this process of triggering and purging, you can purge your emotions real quickly. It doesn't mean you're going to become this unemotional being that doesn't even care. If anything, you care more deeply than you've ever cared before. You just also don't become anchored in the things that are happening around you and get so stuck on them that you can't let them go. So a good example of this would be my buddy Jesus. I love talking about Jesus as a teacher. He's one of the best teachers I feel like I've ever had, and he was one of the most loving beings that any teacher that I've ever heard of. Certainly, I don't know if you've heard of many that are much more loving, but I think he's about
Pretty good.
about the top of the list.
Yeah.
But when I hear about the experience of him kicking gamblers out of the temple, well, he understood what the value is of a temple, that the essence within a temple is to be really genuinely honored. And so he recognized that individuals gambling within the temple was worthy of anger. It was worthy of anger. That is a very appropriate emotion right then. But after he kicked those people out of the temple, those men out of the temple, he didn't chase them down and tell them to, try to get them to go to jail. He didn't go stomping around the temple and go, those guys, I just can't believe that they did that. He went right back. Yeah, they were out of the temple. The problem was solved. His emotion was out of his body. The problem was solved, and he was able to go right back with absolute authenticity and love and light to going and teaching the lessons that he was there to teach.
Right. And he still loved those
100% the whole time,
changers.
Even when they're
just not allowed to mess.
They just can't do it in the temple. Go gamble wherever you choose to, but not in my temple, not in the temple.
Right.
That's how I feel in my own temple. I don't drink, I don't party, but I also don't care if people choose to do that. I'll even go to a bar with my friends if they want to. I've worked at bars since I quit drinking, but drinking in my home is not allowed. And my temple, I choose to guard it in that way. I also guard my own physical temple different ways than I expect other people to guard theirs. Some people don't drink coffee, and I honor that, and I love coffee, and I honor that. I think he's glad I drink coffee because I'm probably a little happier. But in any case, we all have our own things, but you have a right to choose how to honor your temple, how to honor your home, your temple. And if there's a temple that is something that's very sacred to you and someone's dishonoring it, that might be worthy of anger. Right. But it doesn't mean that you stay anchored in that anger and remain there and continue to take it out on them, because really what's happening is they're gone. You're just angry. You're just saying, right. You're just keeping that feeling inside of your own self and your own physical mechanism. Right. So,
I would like you to address this. Okay. One of the things that I see on a lot of blogs and questions that we've even asked is on the concept of twin flames. And since we're talking about triggers and purging and initiation, the question is, what if my twin flame isn't doing such and such and such? How do I help them? Well, the first thing is nothing. You can't help them except for you go within. So all you can really do is just send that twin, if you believe the twin, love and light, give them as much, but it's their choice.
That's not entirely true. Actually, I was about to agree with you. I was going to say that. I was totally on board with you on that, but I also realized that there's the 10% rule. So first of all, going within means just be the change. Just do what you've got to do for yourself. And I 100% agree with him on that. Anytime you're thinking about how can I change my twin? How can I change my twin? You can't change your twin. And the more you try to, the more that you'll repel them, because energetically it's like two magnets that are the wrong side of the magnet is focused, and so they're pushing each other away. Once you go within and you balance your inner mechanism, the magnetic effect changes to where you're really drawn together magnetically. Right. However, there is something called the 10% rule. And we're going to talk a little bit about the 10% rule. We did tell someone earlier, I think it was Christine. We told a friend earlier today on our Soul Family group that we would talk about the 10% rule, and this is probably kind of one of the ideal times to talk about that. Now, the 10% rule is something, I know we heard about it, I think through David Wilcock on Wisdom Teachings on Gaia, but I know that that was not an original thought from him. You'd have to look that up. But the 10% rule essentially states that when you give someone 10% of something that is really actually juicy, they will they'll want more. But if you try to force a ton on them, the nature of the human way is that we want to resist those feelings. We get triggered when someone's trying to force something on us, even if it's great. I mean, there's times when I'm handing crystals to people and little kids are like so excited about the opportunity of getting a free crystal. And sometimes adults will just, no. And I can tell that they think I want something from them, when really I'm just trying to give them something nice. So sometimes people are resistant to receiving something, even if it's nice, when they feel like it's forced on them or too much or anything. Hi, Lena, thank you for showing up. So in any case, the 10% rule, how that would apply. Well, when you give someone 10% of something, you just give them a little bit of the juicy details and then you turn around and walk away. They find themselves thinking about it and then they find themselves wanting more. So the one thing I would say would potentially be helpful, you don't want to focus on them. Don't be thinking, I'm going to do this so I can fix them and change them. Because as soon as you get into that mindset, you change energetically. Everything changes energetically. And you cannot, the universe will teach you that that way won't work. It won't. But what you can do is say, you know, I have something that might help in this situation. If you're interested, let me know.
Yeah.
Or just a little bit at a time. And then walk away, because you'll find them, they may not even understand why, because it's an energetic exchange you're doing. They think you're just exchanging words, but what you're doing is an alchemical exchange. And when you give them that 10% and it is really actually juicy or potentially helpful, and then you walk away, they find themselves going, wait a second.
Or they don't want,
or they don't,
and then you don't waste your time.
And you're not wasting your time.
Yeah, there's an old saying that I really love: whatever you resist, persist. And never put something on a pedestal because you put it on the pit. And that's because the universe works in balance. So anytime that if I had a twin flame and I believed in twin flames, and that person is resisting growth, and I'm just trying to, they're not doing this and they won't love me, and gosh, they just won't read their stuff and they won't do the work. Well, by me throwing a resistance energy on them, it's likely
that they're going
to resist it. So the best thing to do is not give that twin or not give that person energy.
Or just to give them just enough. You give them just a twinge of it, and then you turn around and walk away. And you allow them to accept the apple or to not. Yeah. They don't have to, you know.
And Adam did eat.
So I'm going to take a second and talk about spiritual initiation now. Because what happens after a lot of these triggers and purging, and by the way, for those who have just come on, Lena and stuff, we talk about a lot of this at the beginning, and you may want headphones, because once Artemis came on, we found that we may not, it was kind of hard to hear. But we do talk a lot about that triggering process and what's happening within the energetic avatar, what's happening with our supercomputer and how we're releasing those things. But ultimately what ends up happening, especially once you are consciously aware that you are in the spiritual growth process, and this is not going to happen at the same time as a twin or another person, you're not in a race, you're not doing anything, it has nothing to do with age, it has nothing to do with anything like that. It is all based on what you have chosen to experience in this life process. However, when you are consciously growing, when you are consciously seeking spiritual growth and a higher vibration, and you are in the process of releasing vibrations from your physical mechanism, you are going to be faced with what are called initiations. And those are not warned. It's not like you're told in advance, P.S., your initiation's coming up. You find yourself in situations that suck. You find yourself in situations that are not ideal, where you have to really prove that what you've been able to do is master your energy. And I'm going to talk about one of these initiations. Well, were you about to say something? It seems like.
Go ahead.
I think you're going to be surprised I'm going to talk about this anyway.
Okay.
Uh,
I'm always surprised by what you talk about.
okay. So I'm going to talk about one of my initiations, and this is actually really, I'm about to make myself really vulnerable because I would never have a million years thought I would talk about this right now. So, you know, those who have followed our story, or I think anybody on here certainly right now knows that suicidal depression was something I really struggled with almost my whole life. And up until I was 29, and really actually up until I was 30, because after I got out of the hospital the last time, and I was really determined to learn to love myself, and I was really determined to not only love myself, but to turn around and help other people learn how to do that. And I knew the only fucking way, the only freaking way that I could teach someone how to learn to love, or to learn to love themselves, is if I could actually do it. Not just like learn the right things and regurgitate the information, but if I could actually assimilate those things into my body and process them and put them into action. So even though I was 29 when that determination really became absolutely ignited, it took a while for me to actually do those things, to recode myself, to I really loathed myself. I mean, it was hard work. And I was making all of this progress, and I was doing all of the right things, so I thought, and stuff, and I was studying voraciously, and I was putting these things into action in my life. But I also was working at a bar at the time, and not that there's anything wrong with those. As a matter of fact, the bar that I was working at was fantastically fun place to work, and there was a great vibe there. But I'm also an empath. And so I didn't realize how much I was probably tuning into feelings there that weren't mine. Not everyone that goes to a bar is happy, but not everyone that goes to a bar is unhappy. There's a combination. But what was happening is I was going through spiritual initiation, and I was really finding myself struggling with deep levels of depression again. And I didn't know how to explain that, because I knew I was doing all the right things. I shouldn't say all the right things. That's a stupid way to put it. But I knew that I was not just studying and researching how to raise my vibration and grow spiritually, but I was doing the things that I was studying. I knew that I was feeling the changes that were happening. I was having these magnificently profound spiritual experiences with Jamie. It's part of the reason why we could never question the friendship that we have, because both of us were there. We're like, wow, we were there for this experience. There's too many ways that we know that we are part of each other's story to not at least honor that. But so I knew that I was doing all these things, and I didn't understand why I was getting severely depressed again, like really, really depressed. And I was really to the point of like almost ready to commit suicide again. I mean, I was really thinking about it. And at this time, as I was serving in a bar, and I was getting more and more depressed over time. I'm a really good server, just so you guys know. It's something I love doing. I enjoy doing it. I realize that when people are going out to eat or drink or do whatever, they are literally paying for entertainment. And so that's how I take it, as I'm their entertainment, and I take that very seriously. I'm good at it. So I was on this particular night, I was really, really frustrated. It was a very busy night. I had a table that had come in that was like, I don't know, 10 people or something. And I don't know if any of you have ever been a server before, but it was one of those nights where not only did every one of my tables have a lot of people at it, but there was one particular table where everyone was drinking a different kind of alcoholic beverage. It wasn't like, let's get a round of all the same thing. It was everyone getting different ones, everyone getting them at different times. And they were telling me that they were servers. They've been servers before. So don't worry, you're going to get the best tip ever. So that's kind of like the one thing that makes a server feel a little bit better, is at least if they're going to be doing all of this, asking you to do a bunch of extra running, at least you're serving servers. So they know what they're asking of you. They know exactly how much work they're asking you to do. So, they were there all night, and they kept saying the whole night, I promise you're going to get the best. You've been the best server we've ever had. And the end of the night came, and I saw their ticket, and keep in mind, at this point, this is where I didn't even know what initiation or that might be what was going on. And I saw their receipt, and they had signed it, and it was like $200 or something like that. And they didn't leave a tip. They signed it, and they just left a blank tip, blank line. And I was devastated. I had run my ass off for these people, and I know that I had what was for me a very, very weak moment. And in that moment, I put a $10 tip on that receipt. And I felt actually pretty good, like that wasn't even, that was like 5% tip and blah, 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 you know, and they ran my ass off, and that was horrible, and I was so mad.
So you justified it.
So I justified it in my mind, but I went home and I couldn't sleep. I was miserable. I couldn't sleep. I was sad. I was heartbroken. I looked at Jamie, and I ended up telling him what had happened because I was so heartbroken over it. And I realized that I had failed my test, that I had failed a test that I was being offered, and I failed it. And I was so disappointed in myself. I can't even tell you. I mean, that was one of the most big failure type moments. I feel like
You were very scared. You were a scared rabbit.
Just
like what I had sensed when I met you.
That's exactly right. I think that's exactly the vibration I had tuned into, was like a scared rabbit. Right. So I went to go. I called my boss, and I told him that I needed to talk to him, and this was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my entire life. I went into the bar, and I went and explained to my boss what had happened, and I was obviously crying, and I took in $20, and I actually quit my job, and he told me I didn't have to. He said, I mean, I'm actually impressed. I think that probably any server that has ever worked here has done something somewhat, or I mean, I don't know that he necessarily said that, but things like that probably happen more than he realizes. He's like, I've just never had anyone come back and tell me that happened, and you can still work here, or I can give you a recommendation for elsewhere. Or I mean, I think he was more impressed than he was disappointed. I was so disappointed in myself, and it took me a couple of days to realize that was my initiation. That was my initiation, was doing what I was so freaking scared of, because almost anyone can find themselves in a situation where they're so weak and so triggered and so, not weak, but so feeling weak. But how you behave after that is what determines the true depths of your character. You know, when you end up recognizing that you are better than that, it's not just that you want to be better than that, it's that you had a weak moment, you had a moment that is not a testament of who you are as a whole, and that just is a springboard, a reason to not want to do that again. And when that happens, you truly upgrade in a way to another level. I never actually in a million years thought I'd share that story publicly, but for me, that was a huge initiation. And within a few days of that, the difference in how I felt was magnificently different. My depression was alleviating. I was not even resonating at all with the feeling of suicide anymore. The spiritual name that I had received months and months earlier, I was finally willing to embrace that on a public level. It was within a couple weeks of that I created my Facebook account for Anna, and started kind of slowly but surely facing all sorts of fears with lots of fears. And Jamie has been an incredible friend and support through that process, as he's been watching and encouraging my confidence. And meanwhile, he would definitely be able to admit that his initiations have looked more like humility, looked more like like softening over time instead of these.
Right. Well, and here is how an ego or a divine masculine issue is triggered by your success. The story that you just said was a success story. You overcame something. You realized that that is not you, and you corrected the balance. So the energy flow happened here, which allowed you as a soul to increase your vibration.
Right.
As a masculine growing up saying, Jamie, guys, you're in charge. You have to be the one that controls everything.
Mm.
And so now what would happen is here I have this beautiful friend that has now shown and exhibited the ability to stand on her own and raise her confidence a little bit more.
Uh-oh.
Maybe just a little bit. So now all of a sudden I'm saying, hey, that's my job. You just stay. You just sit down in that.
Don't
chair.
worry, I got this.
Yeah. And so what that did is that created a trigger in me or a fear in me, that then I would lash out or I would react or I would do things that were my tests.
Yes, and his
And
tests.
my triggers.
His tests also tested me though, because his tests where he was being triggered, which were trying to teach him how to soften into a more feminine way of allowing, were also forcing me to be stronger and learn how to hold my ground and learn. I mean, early on, there were times where I would really bend and almost,
Right.
whatever. And then after a while, I had to realize, wait, no, this is what I really feel strongly about. And I don't feel quite as strong about that one. And I can be more flexible on that one. But this one, I feel really, really strong about. And this, no, I'm going to hold my ground on this one. And I learned throughout that process how to become more confident, how to become more assertive. What do I care about enough to really, really stand up for versus what was I fooling myself about really caring that much about. So I couldn't have become the leader or I don't want to say leader, but
You're a spiritual leader.
I couldn't have become I couldn't have shared my experience the way that I have with what sometimes feels like confidence and sometimes is more of me like pushing through a feeling. That wouldn't have been possible without the attunement process. So while I was frustrated many times by that process, I also know that it was kind of forcing that final strengthening for me to put into action the things I've been learning throughout my life.
Right.
Not just put into action, but speak my truth.
Right. And as a person who spoke her truth, sometimes those truths would trigger me.
Right, because I was doing these things in action.
Yeah.
The energy work and all of this I've been doing for 13 years. I was just doing it without telling people or doing it for free. I was always doing it for free, but I wasn't like telling people really what was happening.
And if we go back to what we were saying in the beginning, that we're part of the purpose is to learn how to become a master or an emotional master. So if you trigger me, I haven't mastered my emotions yet. So I got to work on whatever happens to me, I can face. And it's just another thing that I do, whether it's finding a new job, whether it's standing up to your spouse, whether it's starting a new business, anything that requires the release of fear.
But often those people who can trigger us the most, we do need to realize that they are the ones that we care the most about. So that's part of the point of emotional mastery. I know right now, because of some differences in the way that my family views things versus the way that I view things, some of my own triggers, and I didn't like, it's very hard for most people to trigger me these days, but some of my deepest triggers are of course associated with where else, but the family I was raised in. Most of us, our deepest triggers go back to our childhood, where we were raised and stuff like that. So I have I think if anything, a higher level of love for my family than I've ever had in my entire life. And yet right now I'm having to do a distancing for my own emotional purposes so that I can relieve those triggers, because I can see that I still have an ability to be triggered by them when I don't have that ability with almost anyone else. If someone was to just say horribly mean things right now on this, and I'm not, please don't do that, anyone, but if that was to happen, I still know that I would just feel love and light for them, and I would just recognize that they were on their journey, and that whatever it is that I triggered in them is bringing something to the surface for them so that they can take a look at it. And I hope that they do. And if they don't, it's not about me. It's about them. But for my own purposes right now, for my own spiritual progression. I'm doing just what I feel like is one of the most loving things I could ever do, which is giving myself a little tiny bit of space. And that might seem backwards, but it's not, because it's going to allow me to heal some of the triggers that make it so um, that sometimes it's hard to see through the pain to the unconditional love. And so I'm allowing myself the gift of releasing those things, because it's also a gift for them. No matter what our future holds, it doesn't hold as pleasant of a vibration if resentment is stuck in there.
Yeah. If you think of it as a relationship where you have a rope around your waist and your family has a rope around their waist, and you both want to go in different directions, that rope is binding you.
Right.
And as you continue to resist each other, all you do is tire each other out. You get sick of each other's energy because you're tired of pulling against that. Right. But once you learn how to purge and release and snip that rope, then all of a sudden you're free to grow. But it also allows them the choice
to grow or
not.
Yeah.
But and it's not really your issue anymore.
Right. And it redirects my focus in a place where I can be the example of what I'm trying to live, instead of trying to tell people or have them tell me. And that's more of the thing, is I choose not to be told anymore. So I know that there's certain situations that we all feel like we need to put ourselves in, whether that's a work situation, whether that's an organization that you're involved in some way, shape, or form, whether that has to do with family. That's one of our deepest triggers, our deepest roots. You don't need to put yourself in any situation that doesn't feel good. You don't. Yeah. You don't ever. Anyone who is trying to convince you that you do, you should just send them so much love and light, because it means that they've been coded enough to believe that they actually have to do that too. And so pray for them that they will find the free will knowledge at some point to know that they don't have to subject themselves to things that create disharmony within their bodies. You can send people love and light, and you can be really discerning about what situations you choose to put yourself in. And the more Jedi you become over time, you can put yourself in any situation you want, and you can transmute feelings instantly. So you could put yourself into any situation. But as you're in that process, give yourself the gift of choosing not to put yourself in situations that are going to add to the disharmony of what you're already experiencing. Honor yourself as you're going through the process. Honor the difficult things you're going through as well as the good things, because even those obstacles almost always wind up being the springboards into initiation. So, we're growing through the good parts, and that's great. But the
struggle, the bad parts, the contrast.
Well, when we're doing a leap.
Oh, quantum leap.
Like a quantum leap, yes, excuse me. So when you do the quantum leaps rarely happen in those moments that were like easy and we were progressively going through. The quantum leaps happen when you overcome something. And those overcoming something is sometimes that you've done something wrong, and you have to acknowledge that. And sometimes it's that you've done something absolutely right, and sometimes it's that you overcome an illness or heal a relationship, communicate well with someone. It doesn't matter. There's a million different ways that can happen. So, right. So similar journeys, yes. Do you have any other specific questions on this topic, Lena or Artemis, or anyone right now? Or I know that a lot of this stuff we went over at the beginning, and I do want to say one other thing. I'm going to, no compromising on your soul's light. Amen. Yeah. No compromising on your soul's light. That is definitely, you're not doing anyone a favor. You're not doing the other person a favor by compromising your soul's light. That's an illusion too. That's manipulation of free will. That anytime you're compromising your light, you're not honoring yourself or the other person that would be in the equation. But I just said something a couple minutes ago about confession, and I just wanted to say real quick in regards to confession. As I've been dealing with people, I deal with people I talk with people right now in about 25 countries, and there's a lot of cultural differences throughout our world still. You know, we are a really, we're a jambalaya that's really mixing up and stewing at this point, but there's still a lot of cultural differences. And one thing that seems to be really common in religions throughout the world is confession. That's cross culturally. And so often I've found people, and Jamie's seen some of these interactions, when people are asking me how to confess to me, like, where do I start? How do I start confessing to you? And I don't mean to laugh, but you don't have to confess to me. You don't have to confess to anyone. You never have to confess to a spiritual leader. Even what I did, that was a spiritual initiation for me, so I could sleep that night. I needed to be able to feel better in my inner mechanism, and it just so happens that my boss handled it in a way that was really, really, really impressive. Oh yes.
What specific perspective?
Can I
Yeah,
finish my
ahead.
thought first, and then we'll come back to that question? Yeah. So, because I keep losing my thought process. So confession. Sorry. In regards to confession. So when people ask me that, my thought is, you don't have to confess to me. You don't have to confess to anyone. Your physical body gets trapped energy. And when you do something that you know is not good, not that someone else knows is not good, that someone else told you is bad, but when your heart tells you that that's not a good thing to do, or it's not like benefiting you, that energy gets trapped in your body, and there's a way that it must be released. If for you, it will feel good to talk about some of the things that you've done, some of the things that you've gone through, the things that you've experienced for purposes of release. Absolutely do it. Don't confess to someone who's going to make you feel shame. Don't confess to someone who's going to tell you you did something bad and all the ways to get better. Right. Confess to someone who you know honors you and loves you and will love you no matter what, so that you can release it in a way that's safe and honoring, and you can get it out of your avatar. That is the purpose. That is the purpose of release. That is the purpose of confession. So if you're doing it with someone that you're scared of, or that is shaming you or making you feel bad, or you think you have to, even if you're just doing it because you think you have to, you're adding to the weight of that energy caught inside of your physical mechanism. You're not releasing that weight. It's the exact opposite of what the purpose is of quote unquote confession. Right. So just please honor yourself enough to know to go within and say, is this something that I can just forgive myself for? Or do I need to talk to the person that was involved in this? Or do I need to talk to a therapist? Or do I need to talk to Anna? Or do I need to call Jamie? Or do I need to talk to my cat? I don't care. Maybe do you need to write it down on paper to get it out of your physical body? However you need to. Sometimes you may find that you confess one thing, and then a whole history of other things don't seem to bother you anymore. So you don't necessarily have to lay out every horrible thing that's ever happened in your entire life, because the one initiatory release released a lot of other things. So yes, we were in school.
In fact, I
at 10 years old in school, she was forced to confess. Sure. See, that's how we both were in our religion. Confession was I don't want to say forced, but not really optional.
Well, and
and we were raised very very different, but in the same religion, different area, same state.
Same state.
Religion, yeah.
So if you're trying to lose weight and you realize that you're trying to lose weight because you feel bad, and that's the cause of the weight, you don't get on the scale and go, oh my gosh, this makes me feel bad, I'm not losing any weight. So you can't get a positive result with negative reinforcement. So if confession to somebody makes you feel sick, that is your intuition saying, this isn't for you, that's not your path. Now, mom and dad and priest and everybody tells you got to go to confession, that kind of stuff, but all it's doing is reinforcing something that you don't like, and you can never get past that if you continue to confess.
But because if you're reinforcing it, what you're doing is adding weight, adding weight, adding weight, adding weight. Well, what happens to things that you add more and more weight to? Well, look at the sun, look at the earth. They create gravity.
Right.
When the more weight you add to something, the more gravity it has. So it creates more and more weight.
Yeah. Yeah, a simple example is when you're driving down the street and you get pulled over by a cop and you see those red and blue signals behind you, your heart just gets sick. Then the next day or for the rest of your life, every time you're driving, if you notice a police officer in your mirror, all of a sudden it's like, oh, don't pull me over, don't pull me over. You check your speed, make sure you're not speeding, and seatbelts on. You just want to make sure they pass by you.
You get well trained.
Yeah. So you're definitely not going to see the cop behind you and then all of a sudden speed up and throw garbage out the window. It's a for sure ticket.
Right.
You wouldn't do that. So
coding.
So
yes, Lena, you're very, very welcome. Thank you for coming. We're looking forward to doing more like this. So if you guys have other questions for me individually, for Jamie individually, or that you'd like us to address as a team, as battle buddies, we would love to do that further. It's been an hour and a half, so we're going to wrap it up today, but we'll come back and discuss more. I know that we already have something that we wanted to talk to people about in regards to relationships here pretty soon, so that'll probably be in the next few days. We love you guys.
Love and light, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Yay, thank you for coming.